When I started tapping Q&A more than 15 years ago, the goal was to answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping and EFT so you can get the most out of every round of tapping. And 15 years later, the goal has changed. And that doesn't mean that I'm wandering away from tapping. I still think tapping is a super important primary thing, and most of the resources in the podcast are still going to be dedicated to tapping. But there's a change. And so today in the podcast, I'm going to talk about the change, not to the website, but to my approach to tapping and how this very simple, subtle change, which is twofold, has transformed how I get more and more out of tapping. This is Gene Monterostelli. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 543, originally aired November 30th, 2022. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you get a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today we're going to talk about my approach and how I think about tapping and how that has changed and the radical changes that has made in the results that I'm getting for myself and with my clients. Before we do that, two quick things. First of all, we have a free 10-part guide on how you can use tapping to eliminate self-sabotage. It's absolutely free. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button, enter your email address, and every day for the next 10 days, I will send you a small bite-sized tool that'll help you get more out of tapping to eliminate self-sabotage. Then at the end of 10 days, you can take the tool or two that works the best for you and use them over and over again. Secondly, I'd like to send a big shout out to all the supporters of the Tapping Q&A podcast. These are people who voluntarily support the podcast financially so that you can get this amazing content absolutely free. Supporters get a bunch of awesome bonuses. And if you would like to be one of those amazing supporters and get some really cool bonuses, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. That's tappingqa.com/support. And once again, thank you to all of our amazing supporters. For me, there's kind of two changes that have been going on as I think of tapping, and they work hand in hand. And I want to share them with you today because I think they will make it easier for you to get even more out of your tapping practice. Like I said at the top, my focus before was to help people to be better at tapping. And now that's not exactly the case. And so the first is I want to talk about what my new outcome is. And my second is what is my new approach to tapping? And then we can kind of weave those things together. So for the last year and a half or so, the mantra that I have been playing with is this idea of first action, best action. And what I mean by first action, best action is, what is the first action that I can take in order for me to take an action that is the best possible action for me? So for example, at the beginning of the day, I spend some time tapping on my to-do list. So the first action is clearing the resistance I have to taking action, which then sets me up for a morning that is significantly more productive because I've eliminated my resistance. Earlier this week, I did an interview with someone who isn't super used to doing interviews with people. She was a little nervous to interview me, which when you aren't used to doing something like that, that makes sense. And so what she did was before we started, she took a nice big deep breath. And you could see her relax, which then made the conversation significantly easier. Again, the first action was taking a nice big deep breath. And so my goal has become not teaching people how to tap in a more effective way, but instead, how is it possible for us to do something, the first action that we do, that then sets us up for a series of best actions? And tapping is one of the most amazing tools for doing that. And sometimes the first action is just tapping to reduce stress so I can take action. Sometimes the first action is tapping on a limiting belief that is preventing me from taking action. Sometimes the first action is with my practitioner going after this big honkin' trauma that I have been carrying around, which is making my daily life much harder. And so first action might be small and it might not. But for me, the goal is, how do I consistently take action in an authentic way so that I can create the life and the business that I love? And it's such a simple revelation, at least for me, recognizing the fact that everything we do, we are doing in context. I'm not just taking an action. The way I always joke about it with my clients is life is not a high school physics problem. In high school physics, if you took physics in high school, every single problem was done in a vacuum at sea level on a frictionless plane. And the reason why you did the physics problems in a vacuum at sea level on a frictionless plane was so you could isolate velocity and force and mass and acceleration and whatever we were trying to figure out. Because the moment you start introducing wind resistance and friction on the floor or elevation, the calculations get much, much, much more complicated. And so in a graduate level physics program, if you're building buildings, you need to take all of those things into account. If you're trying to learn the fundamentals, you can do everything in a vacuum on a frictionless plane at sea level. And oftentimes when we approach our transformation, we approach it as if we are in a vacuum at sea level on a frictionless plane. When in reality, we're in context. And the context might be the room that I'm sitting in. Is it safe for me to do tapping and say stuff out loud, or do I feel uncomfortable doing it because I'm sitting on the subway? Is it because I'm so close to the issue I can't see it clearly? Or I had a really bad sleep last night, so I'm in a grumpy mood because I'm poorly resourced? And when we recognize the fact that everything that we're doing is in context, the first action is the action that is about the context. At the beginning of the day, I'm tapping on my to-do list because the context is there are things on this list that are of stakes because they're about growing my business. And because that is the case, I might be afraid to do them. And so by putting myself in the situation of making that change, it becomes really, really important. The other thing that this does is you'll notice I don't say first action, perfect action. First action, success. When I say best action, I don't even mean the best possible action. I mean the best possible action that I can make today. Because sometimes I can be really angry and I do some tapping on that anger and it gets me to frustration. And that's as far as I can go. And I'm still really frustrated. Well, I'm significantly less likely to make the best possible choice when I'm frustrated than if I'm at peace. But I'm going to make the best action possible because I've left the state of anger to the best resource state that I can reach for in that moment, which in this case happens to be frustration. So I'm more likely to take an action that I'm happy with that's going to follow through with what's going on. And so the goal of tapping is not to do tapping well. The goal of tapping is to change my resource state, to change my context, to change how I am showing up to what is in front of me so I can make thoughtful, deliberate, creative, funny, funky, whatever those choices are in front of me. Because I'm operating from a place that is more grounded and more well-resourced. And so as we continue to talk about tapping on the podcast and articles on the website and videos that are showing up on the website, know that it's now about the context. And again, sometimes the context is doing inner child work. Sometimes the context is doing the movie technique so I can clear something from the past. So I'm not throwing out anything that we've done. Instead, this is about positioning the tapping and why am I tapping? Not just to feel better, but how does feeling better impact me in this moment? So this is the first part of it. The second part of the change that has been really useful for me, and this is newish in my mind in maybe the last 6 months, is I no longer think of tapping as an approach. I now think of tapping as a tool. And this is what I mean by that difference. Because for me, it might not sound like a big difference in that vocabulary, but for me, there's a really significant difference. So a cutting edge is a tool. And so there's lots of ways a cutting edge can be used. A cutting edge can be used to cut some rope that has a package tied up. A cutting edge can be used to precisely cut a piece of fish to make beautiful sushi. A cutting edge can be used to do surgery and open a body up so that we can take something out that is infected. And so a cutting edge, a knife, a sword, or whatever, is a tool. And there are many different approaches that you can take with that tool. And just because you have the tool doesn't mean you can do all the approaches. I can cut up my dinner, but I cannot cut vegetables with the precision that is needed for Thai cooking. And so when we recognize the difference between a tool and approach, we recognize that when we're learning about the tool and we're applying the tool and we're thinking about how we use that, it helps us to recognize how to start, where to start, and what's safe for us to do and what's not safe for us to do. It's safe for me to cut a rope to open a box. It's not safe for me to cut up someone's stomach to take out their spleen. Or for someone else, it might be safe to do that thing. So now let's think about tapping in that particular way. This is what I mean by tapping as a tool. It's not an approach. Tapping can be used lots of ways, the exact same way a cutting edge can be used lots of ways. Tapping can be used for emotional first aid. I'm really frustrated. I'm really scared. It calms me down in the moment. Tapping can be used to clear a limiting belief that is preventing me from taking action. Tapping can be used to clear a substance sensitivity. Tapping can be used to remove a trauma that is a burden inside of me. Tapping can be used to reduce pain, to clear my sinuses, to help me to fall asleep. And in each one of those places, the way we apply the tool is slightly different. It's similar, but it's different. And just because the tool can be used in an application doesn't mean it's appropriate for us to be using the tool in that particular application. And this is what I mean by that. Tapping apparently is a very, very powerful tool for dissociated identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personalities. And just because tapping is really, really good at that, it does not mean that it is appropriate or safe for me to be doing that. The line that I've always used in my training is, if I'm not qualified to deal with an issue without tapping, tapping does not qualify me to work with the issue. Just like if I'm not qualified to do surgery, simply putting a scalpel in my hand does not qualify me to do surgery because I now have the right tool. And I think this is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's important because, even though we used to say try it on anything, that's not actually a safe and appropriate way to tap. Because even though tapping might be useful on anything, I might not be the right person to be trying it on anything with because I'm not skilled enough to do that. So when we start to look at it as an approach, not a tool, it helps us to create boundaries about what is safe and what is appropriate. Earlier this week in my office hours, for my students, we do office hours, and one of my students was asking a question about a client who was just thinking in vague terms about something from the past, was severely traumatized. And so she was asking questions about, well, how do we tap for this? How do we tap for this? How do we tap for this? And after we'd talked about a couple things, my response came, and if I was in this circumstance working with that particular client where just a word immediately starts taking them back into a past trauma and re-traumatizing them, I am not a skilled enough practitioner to deal with that in a healthy way. And so if I'm dealing with someone like that, I need to help them to find someone who is the right fit for them. And so it becomes super, super important when we think of approach, what is safe. The other thing that it does is when I recognize what my goal is, it helps me to choose how I'm going to apply the tool. I approach calming myself down in a moment differently than I approach clearing a limiting belief about doing something at work. And it is possible over the course of tapping, I might do multiple of those things. I might be trying to clear a limiting belief, and all of a sudden I bump into a past trauma, and now I'm tapping on a past trauma. Or I'm tapping on a past trauma, and all of a sudden I'm really, really overwhelmed and scared because I remembered something that is overwhelming, and now I'm doing emotional first aid. And so as we do this, we might bump from approach to approach to approach as we're using the exact same tool. And so you can see, maybe, in the way that I'm thinking about this, how this is transforming my approach to the tapping tool set. I am no longer trying to be a better tapper. What I'm trying to do instead is I'm trying to transform my resource state in any given moment, be that in a small way or a big way, so I consistently take authentic, clear action. And tapping is one of the most amazing tools I have at my disposal in order to take a first action which creates best action. As I am thinking about creating that transformation, I'm not thinking about, I'm going to tap on that thing. I'm thinking, what is going on here and what is the approach I need to take? Am I approaching this from emotional first aid? Am I approaching this from clearing a limiting belief? Am I approaching it from reducing pain? Am I approaching it from clearing a story that I'm carrying that is harmful to me? And inside of this, there's all sorts of nuance and subtlety that might not actually be a difference. One of my favorite things when we're trying to come up with marketing copy for my business clients is, well, that's a difference without a distinction, meaning that those are different words, but there's not really a difference. So it is possible as you're hearing this approach, tool, first action, best action, I'm trying to be a better tapper, you might not see a difference in those things. And that's great. I need you to be in the place that you're going to be. But for me, having these two overarching principles have really transformed the way I think about my transformational work. And I think about my approach to tapping. Because my goal isn't to add a bunch of tools. I was having a conversation in office hours today where someone was saying, how do you clear resistance? And I gave them an approach. And they said, well, okay, that's a really great tool. What's another tool that we could use to do a similar thing? And I'm like, I don't have another tool. When I have resistance, I tune in. I feel the resistance. I ask the resistance what it's afraid of. I ask it what proof does it have? And that's the tool I use. Much the same way that there's only one way I tie my shoes. I always tie my shoes in a bow like we do, and I don't think, oh, that works all the time. Do I have another way of tying my shoes? Now, in unique circumstances where shoelaces break or something like that, then I might need a different approach because of the context of the moment. But for the most part, I use the exact same knot on all of my footwear all of the time. And the same is true with our tapping. It's not about adding 87 million approaches. It's about having useful approaches that allow you to do that. And so hopefully, as you look back in the archive of the over 500 podcasts and the videos and the articles, you see that coming through, because this isn't a huge change of direction, but it's a way to think about transformation in a slightly different way. Not how do I tap on that, but how do I change my resource state so it's easier for me to make a good, thoughtful choice? Ooh, tapping might be an approach to that. So those are my thoughts. That's what I'm knocking around. For those of you who have been in my Art of Delivery monthly class at any point, starting January 1, it is going to be called First Action, Best Action. We're still going to be doing Art of Delivery, but we're going to be doing a bunch of other stuff. So it's not just about equipping you as a tapper. What I want to be doing is I want to equip you so it's easier for you to take authentic action in the relationships that you're creating, in the businesses that you're building, in the activities that you spend your time with, in the way you look at yourself in the mirror and the way you think about yourself. Because if we can find ways to consistently make a choice, to take a first action that makes it easier for us to make consistent best actions, we're just going to create such a better world. Because, it's selfish. if I am able to help someone to consistently take authentic action, then their life will be better. And if their life is better, the world around them is better, which means the world is better, which means my world is better. And I know that sounds super, super cheesy, and it is super, super cheesy, and it's super, super true. As we continue to find ways to do that, to move forward. So it is still Tapping Q&A. We're still going to be talking about awesome ways to get more out of your tapping practice and how to think about resistance and change and all of that stuff. But I don't want you to be good at tapping. I want you to be better at consistently taking authentic action so that you can create something that you really, really love. And it doesn't have to be big. Sometimes the things that we really, really love are small, and that's awesome too. And if we're able to do that, oh my gosh, it's going to be a different world. And that's why I'm thinking of first action, best action as a movement. And again, that is silly and cliche and ridiculous, but at my fiber, in my being, that's really what I want. That's what I want for me. That's what I want for you. So I would be interested, I would be fascinated actually, to hear your thoughts, to hear your reflections on this particular framework. You know, and like I said, if you disagree with it, that's okay. You're still going to find lots of really awesome tapping tools going forward. But I'd like to hear how that resonates, how that sits with you, what feels clean and clear and what is just discordant. I can always be reached at support@tappingqa.com. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. If you know someone in your life who would enjoy a conversation like this, maybe you don't want to respond to me, but there's one or two people that you like having big conversations with, share the podcast with them. Don't spam your inbox, but just say, hey, this is something that's fascinating. I don't know if I agree with this guy, Gene, but it might be a good place for us to have a conversation. It would mean the world to me if you were an ambassador for the podcast. The single highest compliment you can pay me and the work that I create is by turning to someone else in your life saying, hey, I think this will make a difference for you too. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast. In podcasting parlance, subscribe is free. There are podcasts you pay for. Tapping Q&A is not one of them. Everywhere you get audio, just search for Tapping Q&A. Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, basically anywhere you get audio online. Just search Tapping Q&A, click subscribe, click follow, whatever makes sense for the ecosystem that you're in. And most importantly, turn on those notifications so when a new episode comes out, you're notified right away. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to talking to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli and Tapping Q&A.